Your Humanities Half-hour is brought to you by the Northern Marianas Humanities Council.
Hapaday, Zantiro. Welcome to your Humanities Half-hour. I'm Catherine Perry. As we celebrate the 75th anniversary of the Battles of Saipan and Tinian this week, it's my pleasure to have in studio one of the survivors of that incident. David Mangarero Sablan was 12 years old on the day of the invasion, June 15, 1944. Uncle Dave, such a pleasure to have you with us today.
Well, it is really a privilege for me to be heard by some of our local folks on what it was in 1944, and I'll be glad to answer any and all questions if I know the answers. So go away.
I'm so excited to give you the opportunity to share your story because you were 12 and you remember more than, say, for example, my mother, who was 10 days old. What can you tell us? Tell us a little bit about what it was like before the invasion, how the community seemed to change and how it affected you and your family.
Yeah. Well, first of all, on Saipan, we had Japanese staying here. We had Korean. We had Okinawans. And, of course, we were the Chamorro and the Carolinian folks. And the war already started in 1941. So we're talking about 1944. Many of the people that had large houses were evicted by the Japanese and were taken over by the Japanese for their own barracks because they were running out of housing for the Japanese military. So we moved over to a farm area where we stayed there. So essentially, the school that I attended went up to about 5th grade. And then after that, you graduated. But the last 2 years of Japanese schooling were not academically oriented. We were, the people who were 4th and 5th grade were required to work for the Japanese, and we built the airfield, the emergency landing field for the Japanese fighters. And this is quite obvious. The road that led from Gil Ada's farm, athletic building, to the community church area. You see a strip.
And it's very straight.
Very straight.
And there's a reason why Beach Road is very straight.
Yes, it was exactly a mile long. And we worked on that for 1 year. And because I was already 5th grade, we graduated at that field. And this is in April of 1944.
What kind of work did you and your classmates have to do to build this field?
Well, as part of the construction, we moved a lot of sand, some corals to level and widen the road into a landing field. And that's basically what we did. So we moved a lot of sand to level the airstrip, and that's essentially that's what we did all day for 1 year.
Do you have any recollection of how life was with the Japanese living here before the war preparations started compared to right prior to the invasion?
Yes, we were, as I mentioned earlier, the inhabitants of Saipan were predominantly Japanese, followed by Korean and Okinawans, and of course with the natives. But we were classified as third-class Japanese citizens. They call it Santo Kokuming, Ichini-san. And we were the third class, and we had limited privileges. The natives had limited privileges, and even the school in those days would only go up to fifth grade, and then you graduated, wherein the Japanese had their own high school and all the other goodies. But essentially that's how we were treated. They also told us what store to buy our food, our materials, or anything that we need. So we were essentially guided, and the decision was purely theirs. The decision on how to live, the decision on what to do, and so forth. So it was not a very easy life to live, and that's the way it was before, during the war before 1944.
We're going to talk a little bit more about your family, but before we do that, could you share with us about your family, who your parents were, and how many of you were in your family at that time?
Yeah, well, my father Elias was married to Carmen Mangarero, of course my mother, and there were 8 children. Yeah, starting with Mariquita, married to Bill Reyes, and Magdalena, John Rosario's mom, Ignacio's the eldest, and he's got his family in Garapan. Then below that is Mariano, who's married to the Rashang family, Rashang. Then, of course, yours truly. I later married Rita, and right below me were Merced, Rudy, and then Rudy was the youngest during the invasion. Later on, after the invasion, when we were liberated, of course, Mom gave birth to Henry. And so that's the family that we had during the war and invasion of Saipan.
You mentioned a date that kind of sticks out in your mind, June 10th, 5 days before the invasion. You were looking up at the sky, I think you said, and you saw what?
Okay. Backtrack just a little bit. On Sunday, it was Sunday, June 10th, Mariano and I were getting ready to go out and beg for some food, because we were living on a farm in those days, and we had very little food to eat, or the growth, the vegetables and the fruit that we had were all everybody's food, including the Japanese soldiers. So one day Mariano and I were getting ready to go out and beg for some food from our Japanese military friends, the tank battalion, only to find that as we looked up, there were airplanes fighting at each other, crashing, the bombs were going on, the cannons were exploding all over the place. So Mariano and I decided not to go anywhere anymore.
Good idea.
We better return home, because this appears to be a very serious war, the Battle of Saipan. And so we returned home only to find that everybody is already in the shelter. The Seman family and we were sharing a shelter that was man-made by the Seman family.
Now, what was the shelter like?
Well, we dug deep into the hole, into the ground, and then we put the coconut trees on top, horizontally, and then we covered them with rock and sand and soil, actually, and that's what we have an entrance on both sides, and so we were a little bit crowded in the shelter because the Seman family are not small, and we were 10 of us with our parents, but we hid there while we hear all kinds of bombardment, explosion, crashes of airplane, and as we looked up, we saw airplanes that did not bear the rising sun, the red mark. So we figured that they were the American airplanes. And those airplanes did a round-robin bombardment of Saipan and Tinian daily. And this was, so Mariana and I said, thank God we did not have to go in and be part of the battle. But we saw airplane making a round-robin, bombing Saipan, then they go to Tinian, bomb Tinian, come back to Saipan, bomb again, and then towards the evening they would disappear. They did that for several days until we decided we better go into that cave.
What were you thinking at this time? Did you feel the Americans were here to help, or were you afraid of them?
Well, you know, a funny thing you'd ask that, because in school we were told that never do anything, because they said when the Americans land on Saipan, they will kill everybody. And this was the impression that we got from our teachers. And he says, you take your sickle and cut their feet when they come down by parachute. But and so we were all afraid to note that the Americans were going to eventually land, and we were so afraid. And that's the impression that the teachers told us, that everybody's going to be killed. So do everything you can to protect yourselves.
So after the aerial bombardment, a lot of families took shelters in caves, and your family did too.
Yes. The following day, on the 11th, which was Monday, Dad, my father Elias, decided that we better go up to a cave that he is aware of. He knows where it is, and hide there, because the bombardment is going to be, the shelter we were in were vulnerable. So we all moved up to the cave on the upper part of the area where we're living, and lo and behold, we found people already in there. The Guerrero family, Joaquin Guerrero family, and Joaquin Crisostomo family were already in the cave. So the Salmon family and the Sablan family were the following families that moved into the cave. And the cave was big enough to handle, a lot of people. So we took a cubicle in the cave and we hid there. And my dad saw a little hole on the side of the cave facing westward that he used as an observing area. So that's where we moved up to the cave, hoping that we would be saved from death and the invasion of war.
And what was it like when you were in the cave, and how did you guys survive?
Well, we had nothing to eat there. All we had was the room to share among the Guerreros and the Crisostomo, Sablan, and Seman. And we had nothing to eat. And so Dad decided that the able people can go down the hill and get sugarcane on a daily basis. Every morning before sunup, 3 or 4 people would go down to the sugarcane field and would cut sugarcane and bring it up before sunup. And that was our meal for a whole 3 weeks that we were in that cave. And essentially that's the way we survived. For 3 weeks we had nothing but sugarcane. But I still have a very strong teeth.
There was one morning where they went to get the sugar cane and they encountered a Japanese patrol.
Yes. Well, daily, that was the routine. And of course, the cave was full of chewed sugarcane. remains. Anyway, so one morning when the 3 or 4 people went down from the different families, they ran into a Japanese patrol. And so they said, let's hide. So they hid in the sugarcane field for at least 45 minutes, almost an hour, until the Japanese patrol disappeared. There were about 8 or 10 of them. So they hid in the cane field until they disappeared, and they immediately cut some sugarcane and brought it up. And by then, of course, the American ships were already on the western side of Saipan. And there were still a lot of fighting and so forth and so on. But when they came back up, the sun was already up. So the fleet of American ships saw people crawling on top of the hill there, so they started shooting.
Oh, no.
Very close to the entrance of the cave. And of course, we all went in there and we prayed again, God, please protect us. And that's essentially the way we were experiencing. 2 hours later, we heard people outside the cave talking, but we did not understand what they were saying. So Dad immediately decided we better hide and remain quiet, because it appears that the Americans are right outside the cave. So we all went to the extreme part of the cave and hid and kept our mouths shut, only to find that one of the baby cried that gave us away. And immediately the 3 Marines that saved us, we discovered there were 3, came closer to the entrance of the cave, and one of them would yell in his broken Japanese language, and he said, "Shimpai nai de, datakoi," means without fear, come out. And there were 3 positioned themselves. So my dad, without waiting, he jumped right out and he said, "I surrender." The 3 Americans says, "Oh, you speak English?" Dad says, "Yes, a little." And he says, "By any chance, is your name Elias Sablan?" He says, "Yes." He says, "We've been looking for you because we needed someone that spoke English to help us interrogate the military prisoners, Japanese military prisoners that we have captured." So Dad says, "Of course, I'm prepared to help you in any way I can. But we got a lot of people inside this cave, so what do?" He said, "Bring them out. Don't worry. We're not going to hurt them." So my brother Ignacio yelled inward into the cave, says, come out, don't worry. These are the American people, and they're not going to hurt us." So we all came out with our hands up, and we looked at these 3 Marines. They were very tall, except John. John, who was the leader of that group, was only about 5'4", about 145 pounds. That was and then one of them, Gene Engels, I got their names later on, was wearing a rosary, and then said, "Oh, these people are okay. They're not going to hurt us because they're wearing a crucifix, around their neck." And when we all came out, my dad asked one of the Marines, "Can we go down and look for the others who were down there 2.5 weeks ago to see whether they're still there?" So they went down, and about a half hour later they came back, and we learned that those who were in that shack when we went down, when the cave got to be so hot, we went down to this, and they were not there anymore, only to find that they have been liberated by the Marines. And we learned that Camp Susupi was subdivided into three, for the Chamorro and Carolinian, the Japanese camp, and the Korean camp. And we were told that the occupants of that ranch were all liberated, and they're safe, and they're down in Camp Susupi.
How is it that your dad knew a little bit of English?
My father, his father and his grandfather were crew members of the Charles Morgan, the whaling vessel that used to sail out of New Bedford, Massachusetts, out to the west coast and started down to Australia and northward to this area. My great-grandfather, Jose Sablan, and grandfather, Felixberto Sablan, my dad's father, were crew members. And Felixberto Sablan, my grandfather, was a cabin boy for the captain of the Charles Morgan. And somehow my grandfather also lived in California, San Francisco, for 5 years, and was able to collect all these books and brought back and gave it to my father. And my father learned his English from his father. That's the way my father learned how to speak English.
Talking about Camp Susupi, what are your more memorable things about living in the camp?
Actually, we were very happy that we saw the rest of the natives in the camp, because the camp was subdivided to, like I mentioned, Korea, Japanese, and Okinawans, and the natives. Carolinian and Chamorro was another camp. But I was really glad to see the family, and somehow it was kind of the turning point of our life. All the people here in Saipan, because we feel as though we're now safe and we don't have to worry too much about being killed as a result of the war. And the American government, better known as the Civil Affairs, they were well prepared to handle our situation. And so the first thing that happened to us, my father was appointed the chief of police for the camps. So he recruited some of the former policemen from the Japanese occupation and assigned them with the military police at each of the gates. So there were essentially 3 gates, and there were maybe about 12 or 15 locals, natives, who were members of the police. But in those days, we call them the ICs, Insular Constabularies. And that's how we were doing. My dad also requested, in his broken English, to the commanding officer whether the young kids can also work at these offices for free so they can learn how to speak English. And this is how I learned my English. If you like to know what the few words that I learned, first, mop, good morning, thank you, floor, coffee, and that's essentially my few vocabulary in English that I learned. On weekend they would drink, and then on Monday, when I reported to work, they wanted me to make coffee so they can sober up. And essentially that was, I used to make coffee all day for them, because we used to use an alcohol surveil to cook the coffee, the hot, and it was kind of a hard work for me, because I did not know how to speak English, and I did not know too much about coffee, but I learned very quickly.
Considering the traumatic experience you went through as a young person, you seem to not have carried any of those emotional or wounds from that time. Why do you think that is? And why, or do you, maybe I misunderstand, do you feel you've healed from what happened to you and your family? And why do you feel it's important to tell your story?
Well, I think that the people must understand that during the Japanese occupation, we did not have a full liberty of our life, and although afterwards, after a few months, we learned that the Americans were good people, and they gave us the freedom to do pretty much what we wanted to do, and that was the turning point of our life. And we really appreciate. I never say enough to express my appreciation as well for my family, that we were well treated by the American folks, and it took away all of our doubt that we were going to be killed by the Americans.
What is it you hope people will take away from you sharing your story? You've also written a book, by the way.
Oh, did you have a book? No, I think that the people should appreciate the lives that the American military folks gave so that we can live today. I think this is very, very important, and to express my appreciation, at least to the 3 Marines. I joined the lifetime 2nd Marine Division Association associate member, even today, and and we were also. I took the pleasure of bringing the 3 people, the 2 out of the 3 people to Saipan, to go up to the cave and show them where we were, and to show them and express our appreciation for everything that they did. They risked their life to save us, and we would like the folks on Saipan to continue this feeling that we forever are indebted to those soldiers, sailors, Marines that save us from the hills, because without them we will not be here today.
Uncle Dave, I want to thank you for making time to share with us this part of your life today. And I would like to extend an invitation, if you could make yourself available maybe sometime in the coming weeks. I'd love to hear more of your life story. Would you be willing to share with us?
Of course. Tell me exactly what the questions might be, so that I can be prepared, like a good Boy Scout. Be prepared. And I want to prepare to be able to eloquently answer your questions the next time we get together.
Thank you so much. Any final thoughts before we go?
Well, I just want to express my deep appreciation for the opportunity that you are giving me to share with you my experience, and I hope that I was explicit enough to be able to be heard and understood, and my feeling towards the American and the military folks who gave their lives so we can live. I want to forever thank you. Thank you very much.
Our guest today has been David Mangarero Sablan, speaking about his experience and the experience of his family during the Battle of Saipan. This has been your Humanities Half-hour. I'm Catherine Perry.
This program was supported by a We the People grant awarded to the Northern Marianas Humanities Council from the National Endowment for the Humanities. Any views, findings, conclusions, or recommendations expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily represent those of the National Endowment for the Humanities or the Northern Marianas Humanities Council.